William was a man in his 50s, his body sturdy from years of manual labor, his thick black hair beginning to show signs of graying at the temples. His trade was painting, a simple profession, but one that demanded patience and precision, and he was a master at it. He could transform old, drab walls into surfaces that shimmered with life, as if they were reborn with each coat he applied. But his latest project was unlike any other. He had been contracted to renovate an old school called the Green Meadow, a massive preparatory school built in the early 1960s. The exterior walls alone were enough to tell you that this place had witnessed decades of chaos, silence, and secrets. Local legend, whispered among the neighborhood, said that the school was built on top of an old abandoned cemetery and that its foundations were buried over remains that hadn't been fully removed. Some swore that the earth hadn't forgotten what was buried within it and that it sometimes reminded people of it in inexplicable ways. But William wasn't one to believe such tales. He was a practical man, one who believed only in what he saw with his own hands. He started work in mid-November. The school was empty hours after classes ended, and the cold seeped into the stone corridors. The smell of fresh white paint mingled with the damp earth seeping from the old cracks in the basement. On the third night, he carried a large bucket of paint up the stone stairs to the first floor. As he climbed, he suddenly felt a sharp chill hit his back, a chill unlike any draft. It was as if an icy hand had run down his spine. He stopped. He turned around. No one. The school was eerily silent. He shook his head and continued up, trying to ignore the lingering tremor in his limbs. He reached the corridor leading to the teachers' rooms and began putting the finishing touches on one of the doors. As he brushed on the door, he heard a faint sound coming from the end of the corridor. The sound of something heavy being dragged across the tiles. He froze. He raised his eyes and looked down the corridor, finding the darkness unnaturally deep, as if the light were avoiding that area. He thought to himself, "Tired. This is beyond tired." But the sound repeated itself, this time closer, clearer, as if something or someone was trying to move from one room to another. He put the brush down and approached with measured steps. The closer he got, the heavier the air felt, darker, colder. When he reached the corner, the dim light suddenly went out, leaving the corridor in complete darkness. William stopped. He could hear his own ragged breaths. He could hear his heart pounding. Then he noticed something else. The fingerprint. On the white wall he had painted just minutes before, a small handprint appeared. Not a paint print, more like a print of dark mud and dirt, as if a child's hand had just emerged from the ground and touched the wall. He opened his mouth, speechless. He approached it slowly, reached out, but didn't touch it. And suddenly, a very faint whisper, as if coming from within the wall itself, passed close to his ear. William. A child's whisper, but not an ordinary whisper. It was a voice he knew by name. He felt an electric shock run down his spine and left everything behind. The bucket, the brush, his mind. He ran through the corridors, down the stairs without feeling his feet, and rushed out of the school to his car. When he closed the door behind him, he realized his hands were shaking violently. He started the engine and drove away. Away from the school, from the fingerprint, and from that whisper he shouldn't have heard. That night, William hadn't even begun to repair the walls. He had begun to reveal doors that no one had dared to open for decades. William returned to school the next morning, having spent a sleepless night. He spent hours trying to convince himself that what had happened was nothing more than a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, just too much stress. But deep down, he wasn't convinced. He stood before the school's large iron gate. The air was colder than usual, and the silence felt uncomfortably deep, as if the walls themselves were waiting for him to enter. He hesitated for a moment, then pushed open the gate and went in. He headed straight for the corridor where he had seen the mud print the night before. His steps were slow, his chest tightening with every meter he took closer to the white wall. When he arrived, the wall was completely clean. No print, no trace of mud, no dark color. It was as if nothing had happened. He felt a pang in his stomach, not because he was afraid, but because he was 100% certain of what he had seen the night before. He moved closer. He reached out and touched the wall with the palm of his hand. The paint was dry, cold, but something else caught his attention. William was still in the cellar, the last whisper still hanging in the air like a cold, lingering mist. He hesitated before turning, but when he mustered his courage and turned, he found no one. The room was still. The silence was thick as dust. He closed the files slowly, trying to organize his thoughts. As he returned the papers to the box, something else caught his eye. Something he hadn't noticed at first. A flat wooden box, tightly closed and covered with a thick layer of dirt. On top of it was a faded yellow label with the words in thin print, "Old photographs, first batch." He froze for a moment. Then he pulled the box toward him. He opened it. Inside was a large black and white photograph crammed inside a wooden frame, broken on one side. The photograph was of a whole class of students, about 30 children, lined up in front of the school on its opening day in the 1960s. The children's faces were impassive, their gazes fixed on the camera, possessing that coldness we always find in old photographs. But in the lower left corner, there was one child who was completely different. His clothes weren't like the others. He was wearing a baggy old shirt, looking older than the photo itself, as if he'd stepped out of the 19th century, not the 1960s. His hair was rather long, and his eyes. The child's eyes weren't normal. He wasn't looking at the camera like the others. He was looking directly at William, at the person holding the photo now. An unmistakable gaze. A steady, conscious, icy cold gaze. William said to himself, "This isn't an ordinary child." As he examined the frame, he noticed a crack in the right corner. He reached into his pocket and took out the carved piece of wood. He held it close to the frame, and his heart stopped for a second. The piece fit perfectly over the crack in the frame. Even more than that, the symbol engraved on it was an extension of a small inscription already present on the frame itself, as if the frame contained engraved symbols running its length, but the frame had broken and the symbols were only completed when William put the piece back in its place. He reattached it slowly, and when the piece was in place, something strange happened. The complete symbol became clear for the first time. It resembled a letter,
or a talisman, or an ancient ring used to mark something or someone, and it was engraved with such precision in a way that no child or ordinary person underground could have done. He held the photograph up to his face again, and here shock paralyzed him. The child in the photograph, who had been looking in the old direction, now he was looking directly to the right, not at him this time, but to something behind William inside the vault. He took a step back. He felt the movement of air behind him, cold, light, as if someone had passed near his shoulder. He looked quickly behind him. No one. But when he looked back at the photograph, the child was looking at him again. The same face, the same eyes, but the gaze was harsher, deeper, as if it held an unfinished message. His focus returned to the frame, especially the symbols, now complete. He ran his fingers over the engraving. The wood felt warm, unnaturally warm, as if it weren't just wood, as if something inside him was still living. He needed to breathe, to escape the room. He returned the photograph to the box with one swift motion, stood up quickly, and closed the box as if the place itself was trying to swallow him. But before he left the cellar, he heard that whisper again, this time more clearly, closer. They found the photographs. Not all of them are children. He didn't understand the meaning immediately, but he felt the blood drain from his face, because the whisper seemed to be coming from inside the box containing the photograph.
William returned the next day, feeling that the school had grown heavier, as if it were breathing slowly, watching his footsteps through the ancient walls. Despite everything he had discovered, the photograph, the child, the piece of wood, he convinced himself that he had to see the work through to the end. This time, he decided to start by painting the headmaster's old office upstairs. The office was the largest room in the building, filled with wooden cabinets and scattered yellowed papers that hadn't been touched in years. He opened the door and went inside. Suddenly, a very strong, almost suffocating smell hit him. The smell of chrysanthemums. He stopped in his tracks. Chrysanthemums, a flower associated with funerals, with death, with the memory of the departed. There were no flowers in the room, no logical explanation for the heavy smell that permeated the entire office. He raised his hand to his nose to try to be sure, but the smell was only getting stronger, as if someone had placed a huge bouquet of chrysanthemums right under his nose. He thought to himself, this isn't normal. But curiosity was stronger than fear this time. As he examined the desk, something on the wooden shelf above the table caught his eye. A very old alarm clock, with a rusty brass casing, a cracked glass frame, and hands stuck at an indistinct time. He reached for it. As soon as he touched it, the scent of chrysanthemums vanished completely. It disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared, without a trace, without explanation. A shiver ran down his spine. He took the alarm clock in his hands. He shook it gently. It didn't work. He turned it slightly. Nothing. But when he instinctively pressed the back, the second hand began to spin wildly.
a rapid, unnatural spin, as if something inside the clock was trying to get out or escape. The ticking was audible. Tick, 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 but it wasn't the ticking of an alarm clock. It was like a pulse inside metal. William stared at the hands spinning incessantly. Then suddenly, they stopped. The alarm clock settled on one time, 3:07 a.m. He froze. He didn't know why, but that number made his chest tighten. An inhuman clock, a clock where things happen that shouldn't happen. He moved the alarm clock closer to his face to make sure he saw the number properly. And then, from right behind him, so close as if a mouth were leaning against his ear without him noticing, a faint, clear voice, cold as an open grave, came through. "They didn't find me. They didn't find me." His limbs went numb. The alarm clock slipped from his hand and fell to the ground, but he didn't even hear it hit the ground. All he heard was the pounding of his own heart. He turned quickly behind him. There was no one there. But the scent, the daisy scent that had vanished a moment ago, returned, now, stronger than ever. It was as if that being, that child, or that thing was standing exactly where he turned. He looked down. The alarm clock that had fallen to the floor started ticking again on its own. But this time, there were no hands moving. Instead, it ticked slowly, heavily, each tick louder than the last, like footsteps approaching, step by step. And the more it ticked, the stronger the daisy scent became, and the walls seemed to close in on him. William raised his head and realized he was no longer alone in the office. There was something near the shelf, something waiting for him to turn around again. For days, William had felt that the school wasn't just an educational building, but a vessel holding ancient, dark memories, older than the walls themselves. With each new discovery, the truth slowly unfolded before him, like a curtain being drawn back on something terrifying. While poring over the building plans in the basement, he noticed a small, barely legible detail. The activity hall, formerly a 14th century chapel. He paused over the sentence. A chapel? In this place? Centuries ago? And why was this hidden in the building plans? And why was the entire school built on the grounds of an abandoned cemetery where the chapel once stood? Many questions piled up in his mind. He could no longer ignore anything. So he decided to go to the activity hall himself. He opened the large wooden door of the hall. The air was heavier, older, as if it carried the breath of people long ago. The wooden floor was slightly sloping, and the walls were decorated with faded remnants of ornamentation, perhaps from the time when the church was active. The high windows let in a dim gray light, like the light of a cloudy day inside an open tomb. The place was stiflingly silent. William moved toward the center of the hall and began to notice something strange. On the old wooden floor, there were scratches. Not ordinary scratches, not random ones, but deep, long, and organized. Sometimes parallel, sometimes curved,
and twisted like incomprehensible letters or symbols violently carved. William knelt to examine them. He ran his fingers over the wood. The scratches were definitely not recent. They were dry, rough, but so hard that the wood itself seemed to scream when the mark was made. He said to himself, "They can't be furniture. Impossible." He tried to match the scratches to the shape of the old tables, the chairs, anything else in the room, but none of it made sense. The scratches didn't resemble the movement of furniture being dragged. They resembled something or someone trying to dig, or crawl, or leave a message before it was too late. The strange pattern. He reached out and brushed a thin layer of dust off one of the side stones. His eyes widened. The scratches weren't separate as he'd thought. They were connected in a subtle way. And if he looked at them from a slightly higher angle, they appeared different, as if they were drawing a repeating pattern. A pattern like a semicircle, then a long line, then 3 short lines, then a sharp curve. William looked again from a different angle, and the pattern became clearer. Those were letters, but not ordinary letters. Perhaps symbols, or an ancient language, or the attempt to write a word by someone who didn't have the strength to write it, so they carved it with their fingernails or something sharp. As he stared at the scratches, he noticed something terrifying. The scratches began right below where the altar of the old church should have been, as if someone had been buried beneath it, or trapped there, or trying to get out. He moved closer. He began to trace the scratches with his finger. The symbols were becoming clearer and forming a word that was almost understandable. L-M-U. His heart stopped. It sounded like lamb. Lamb? What? They didn't come out? They didn't stop? They didn't find me? The last word struck his head with a terrifying light. The last whisper he heard in the principal's office was, "They didn't find me." William shuddered. Could the thing that whispered to him be the same one that carved these marks decades ago, in this very old church, under the floor itself? As he tried to rearrange the symbols, he heard a faint sound. A scratch. A very slow scratch, but not ancient. A scratch happening now. Under the floor. Right beneath his feet. Then a light dragging sound. The sound of something moving beneath the wooden floor and getting closer. He quickly raised his head. Alone. The hall was empty. But the sound became clearer, as if someone was now completing the message that had been left unfinished for decades. For days, William had felt that the school wasn't just an educational building, but a vessel holding ancient, dark memories, older than the walls themselves. With each new discovery, the truth slowly unfolded before him, like a curtain being drawn back on something terrifying. While poring over the building plans in the basement, he noticed a small, barely legible detail. The activity hall, formerly a 14th century chapel. He paused over the sentence. A chapel? In this place? Centuries ago? And why was this hidden in the building plans? And why was the entire school built on the grounds of an abandoned cemetery where the chapel once stood? Many questions piled up in his mind. He could no longer ignore anything. So he decided to go to the activity hall himself. He opened the large wooden door of the hall. The air was heavier, older, as if it carried the breath of people long ago. The wooden floor was slightly sloping, and the walls were decorated with faded remnants of ornamentation, perhaps from the time when the church was active. The high windows let in a dim gray light, like the light of a cloudy day inside an open tomb. The place was stiflingly silent. William moved toward the center of the hall and began to notice something strange. On the old wooden floor, there were scratches. Not ordinary scratches, not random ones, but deep, long, and organized. Sometimes parallel, sometimes curved, and twisted like incomprehensible letters or symbols violently carved. William knelt to examine them. He ran his fingers over the wood. The scratches were definitely not recent. They were dry, rough, but so hard that the wood itself seemed to scream when the mark was made. He said to himself, "They can't be furniture. Impossible." He tried to match the scratches to the shape of the old tables, the chairs, anything else in the room, but none of it made sense. The scratches didn't resemble the movement of furniture being dragged. They resembled something or someone trying to dig, or crawl, or leave a message before it was too late. The strange pattern. He reached out and brushed a thin layer of dust off one of the side stones. His eyes widened. The scratches weren't separate as he'd thought. They were connected in a subtle way. And if he looked at them from a slightly higher angle, they appeared different, as if they were drawing a repeating pattern. A pattern like a semicircle, then a long line, then 3 short lines, then a sharp curve. William looked again from a different angle, and the pattern became clearer. Those were letters, but not ordinary letters. Perhaps symbols, or an ancient language, or the attempt to write a word by someone who didn't have the strength to write it, so they carved it with their fingernails or something sharp. As he stared at the scratches, he noticed something terrifying. The scratches began right below where the altar of the old church should have been, as if someone had been buried beneath it, or trapped there, or trying to get out. He moved closer. He began to trace the scratches with his finger. The symbols were becoming clearer and forming a word that was almost understandable. L-M-U. His heart stopped. It sounded like lamb. Lamb? What? They didn't come out? They didn't stop? They didn't find me? The last word struck his head with a terrifying light. The last whisper he heard in the principal's office was, "They didn't find me." William shuddered. Could the thing that whispered to him be the same one that carved these marks decades ago, in this very old church, under the floor itself? As he tried to rearrange the symbols, he heard a faint sound. A scratch. A very slow scratch, but not ancient. A scratch happening now.
under the floor, right beneath his feet. Then a light dragging sound, the sound of something moving beneath the wooden floor and getting closer. He quickly raised his head. Alone. The hall was empty. But the sound became clearer, as if someone was now completing the message that had been left unfinished for decades.
The upper floor of the school was almost deserted. Its walls crumbled, and its old doors trembled whenever a cold breeze swept through the long corridor. William, formerly Mansour, held a new mirror in his hands, trying to convince himself that what he was doing was just routine repairs, but his heart betrayed him, as if the building were watching his every move. He stood before the damp wall and began attaching the mirrors one by one. The lighting was dim, flickering, and fading every few seconds, as if the lamps themselves were afraid of something lurking in the darkness. When he lifted the last mirror, he hammered in the screws, then stepped back to make sure everything was in place. But the moment he faced his reflection, he felt the blood run cold. Behind him, in the mirror only, stood the strange child from the old photograph. The same faded features, the same out-of-his-time clothes, the same blank stare. That look that seemed to be directed not at him, but at something behind him. William's chest tightened. He turned with lightning speed. No one. The corridor was completely empty, as if the world had frozen for a moment. He stared for a long time into the void, waiting for the child to emerge from some corner, from a door, from the floor, but a heavy silence was all he found. He slowly returned to the mirror, pretending that what he had seen was merely a false reflection, or perhaps exhaustion. But when he stood before the mirror again, he didn't see the child. He saw himself, but his reflection was incomplete. His left eye, in the mirror, had disappeared. Not a wound, not a shadow. A deep black hole, like a bottomless well, a well that swallows light and everything that comes near. He approached slowly, reaching towards his cheeks, feeling his real face. It was intact, but his reflection remained distorted, truncated, as if conveying to him a copy of a terrifying future he didn't know. He felt something breathing from within that black hole. It breathed in short, intermittent gasps, slowly, then faster, as if something were trying to escape from within his own reflection. William took a step back, then another, but what happened next almost grounded him to his knees. His reflection smiled. A wide smile, not on his real face, the smile of a small child, bearing features that shouldn't have been there. And William felt then that the mirror wasn't just glass, it was a window, a gateway, and that what was inside was just waiting for the way to open. And a very faint voice whispered not in his ear, but inside his head, "I see you, but you don't see all of me yet." And suddenly the mirror fell from the wall, shattering into hundreds of pieces, but the last reflection didn't disappear. It remained in every piece, looking back at him, as if the black hole in his eye was now part of every mirror in the school.
For days, school had been showing William things that weren't in any of the building plans he'd studied. But what he discovered today wasn't just a design flaw. It was something like a carefully buried secret. He was wandering down the back corridor of the basement, a place almost no one ever went, when he noticed a wall that looked different from the others. It was slightly darker, and the paint was chipped and cracked in a way that suggested something was hidden beneath. He approached and ran his hand over the rough surface until he felt a strange coolness creeping up his fingertips. Then he found it. A door frame. a real door, but the wall had been painted over it decades ago to completely conceal it. He began scraping the edges with his fingers, then with a piece of metal he found in the corridor. After several long minutes of scraping, an old wooden panel was revealed, and a small door, no more than half a meter wide, was secured with 3 rusty padlocks, as if someone had been trying to keep something out, not people out. William stood gazing at the padlocks. The air around the door felt heavier, as if the wall itself were breathing slowly. He felt this room wasn't part of the school. It was a mistake, an addition that had fallen outside of time, placed here for a purpose no one remembered anymore. He picked up the hammer he usually used for his work and hesitated for a moment. But he felt that withdrawing now would be like retreating from something that had truly begun to approach him since his first day at the school. He struck the lock once. The sound of the blow echoed down the corridor as if the whole school had woken up. Another blow. Then the iron lock fell to the floor. A second, then a third, until the door was completely unguarded. As he pushed it open, a musty, old-fashioned smell wafted out, the smell of a place that had been closed for a long time, and on top of that, a sharp smell like burnt wood. He pushed the door open, and it creaked a long time ago, as if someone inside was screaming at it not being opened. The room was small, cramped, with no windows. It contained only 2 things: a very old wooden chair in the middle of the room, and a broken mirror leaning against the opposite wall, its shards scattered around it like the remnants of an unfinished ritual. William approached slowly. Nothing about it suggested it was an ordinary room. Even the walls were dotted with black lines, like human fingernail marks, long and repetitive. He knelt near the chair. At first glance, the chair seemed ordinary, but touching the wood made him feel something like a faint pulse, as if it weren't just wood, but a memory, a heavy memory stored deep in the veins. Then he looked at the mirror. It reflected nothing clear. Only a black mist shimmered faintly, moving, writhing, as if something inside it was trying to gather and emerge. And he suddenly felt that this room was the starting point of everything. It was the heart of the pain that coursed through the school like a sick heart throbbing with an ancient energy that remained alive even though the bodies of its owners were dead. A wave of dizziness washed over him. He felt as if someone was standing behind him, placing a cold hand on his shoulder, but he didn't dare turn around. While the mirror, though shattered, reflected something moving, something watching, something whose name he knew.
Night was beginning to fall on the school windows when William returned to the corridor where the first muddy imprint had appeared days before. The same place, the same light. But one thing seemed unnatural as soon as he approached. The fresh paint, which he had applied himself, was no longer clean. He bent down to run his fingers over the surface. The paint was cracked, but not randomly. The cracks seemed to gather, strengthen, and arrange themselves in a calculated way, as if the wall itself were trying to speak after a long silence. He stepped back a step, then two, and stared. The cracks were tracing scattered lines, then letters. Then they coalesced clearly and slowly before his eyes, letter by letter. He was watching the words come alive on the wall, until the phrase was completely formed. I am the victim. The words were more than just cracks. Its color was darker, like dried blood, as if someone had written it long ago, then covered it with paint, but now it was returning, like a memory that refused to be buried. William stepped back, his heart pounding louder than the sound of his footsteps. Victim? Victim of whom? The question escaped his lips without him realizing it. But the school answered. Though the corridor was completely empty, it suddenly seemed as if the walls were ablaze with a faint murmur, small sounds, intermittent, moving from one corner to another. Then he heard them clearly. Children's laughter. Many laughs. Soft, overlapping, emanating from the ceiling, from beneath the floor, and from behind closed doors. Laughter, unlike children's play, but like something else. Laughter from small chests, but broken ones. Laughter that held no joy, but rather seemed to be trying to mimic joy. Then the light in the corridor began to flicker. Dim, then bright, then dim again. And with each flicker of light, the laughter grew closer, until it was right beside him. He felt a cool breath against his ear, a child's breath, short, ravished, then a whisper, utterly delicate. You haven't seen anything yet. His limbs stiffened, and he nearly collapsed from sheer astonishment. The whisper wasn't from his memory. It wasn't his imagination. It was real. And when he turned around, he saw nothing. But the laughter didn't stop. It echoed throughout the entire school, as if the school wasn't empty as he thought, but full of children who didn't belong to this era or to this world.
William knew he hadn't yet explored every corner of the school. Every previous discovery, every whisper, every reflection led him to something deeper, older, more terrifying. He decided to return to the cellar. The cellar wasn't just a room for files and records. It was where the scent of ancient earth lingered, the cold scent of death that hadn't faded since the school was built on top of the cemetery. He walked cautiously, each footstep echoing in the cellar's silence like a scream. He followed the scent of earth, passing between boxes, under the stairs, until he reached a corner he hadn't noticed before. There, between the crumbling bricks and the sloping floor, something emerged from beneath the foundations. Something small, no more than half a meter in size, its size odd in comparison to its surroundings, a small, neglected stone grave. Its lid was rocky and covered with ancient earth, as if time itself had tried to forget it. William paused for a moment, staring at the spot, his heart pounding, every cell in his body screaming to flee. But he approached slowly. He picked up the old shovel and began digging around the grave.
With each shovelful, he uncovered something stranger. There was old wood, covered in dust and rust, but it wasn't just wood. Something small, a wooden doll, its paint peeling, its eyes empty, yet eerily familiar. He lifted it with trembling hands. He swallowed hard. The doll resembled the child from the group photo in the basement. The same long hair, the same old clothes, the same gaze that wasn't just a face, but a living terror frozen inside old wood. He didn't dare open its mouth or move it. He just held it slowly. And then, as if something had decided to stop waiting, all the school lights went out in a matter of seconds. Utter darkness. No lamps, no daylight, no reflection of anything from the cellar. There was nothing to see except the sound of his own breathing ringing in his ears more loudly than any echo he had ever heard. He shuddered. The doll in his hand was unnaturally cold, as if it were absorbing his body heat. Then he began to hear faint whispers from every direction, from beneath the earth, from the walls, from the very air itself. "Finally, you found me. Finally." He took a step back, but hit the wall. The doll began to move slowly in his hand, its head moving, its eyes looking directly at him, the same look he had seen in the photograph, but deeper, hungrier, more hateful. He tried to scream, but his voice caught in his throat. He couldn't move. There was nothing to see, but his whole being felt the presence of something alive in the darkness, moving around him, getting closer and closer. Time stood still. The world has become one place. Him, the puppet, and absolute darkness.
William couldn't comprehend what had happened. The last thing he remembered was the utter darkness in the cellar, the wooden doll in his hand, and the child's whispers from beneath the earth. Then, suddenly, the school lit up. Natural light, full, everyday light. The absolute silence vanished. He put his feet on the ground, but felt alienated. He paused for a moment. He looked around. He was standing outside the school, next to his car. The sun was shining, the weather was normal, everything seemed normal. But his heart wouldn't calm down. He swallowed. He approached the school only to discover something he never expected. He entered the school. Everything was just as it had been on the first day. The white paint was still wet. The muddy handprint in the corridor was completely white, like a random stain. No graves, no doll, no hidden room, no carved symbols, no scratches, no moving mirrors. It was all a hallucination or a terrifying dream. He stopped, gazed upstairs, then down the hallways, then down the bathrooms. He remembered the new mirror he'd hung himself upstairs. He approached slowly, took a deep breath, and looked into it. He looked and didn't see his reflection at all. The mirror was clean, but empty inside. No face, no body, no eyes. Then something else appeared. The reflection of the broken mirror from the hidden room he'd discovered downstairs, Chapter 7. He saw himself there, in the old mirror, the body weak, the skin pale, the eyes endlessly dark. He was standing in an inaccessible place, a place like a world between worlds, where everything was broken, everything was alive, but dead. He approached the mirror, reached out, but his hand didn't reach anything.
The distance was illogical, as if his reflection was part of another reality. Then he heard himself whisper, a faint voice, but it came from within him, from the mirror. "Am I alive?" He froze. The words weren't just a question. They were a cry from someone trapped between life and death, between school and the graveyard beneath the foundations, between himself and everything he saw but didn't understand. And there he stood, in silence, between two worlds, the natural world and the dark world hidden behind the mirror, wondering, was everything that happened real, or just the beginning of an endless road?